This is Stone Soup, a podcast by the charity Age UK Camden. They have been supporting older people in Camden for over half a century to stay active, connected, independent and empowered in later life. For more information, visit ageukcamden.org.uk.
Okay, my name is Alison, Mary, Collins. I was Durant, but I became Alison Kelly in 1970. I live in the flats where I went as a baby immediately after I was born. So I've lived in just by Hampstead Heath all my life. I did move out of the family flat for 40 years to bring up children, but it was only 2 roads down. And I was born there. I lived there because my dad had discussed with his landlord, saying he was desperate to find a flat near the Heath because his girlfriend at that stage was pregnant. And he was offered a flat called Heathview, which is on Gordon House Road, and it was too small for my dad. He put an advert in the Ham and High, said, does anybody want a posh, small flat for a large family flat? And he got the large family flat, a place called Brookfield, and Heathview, the woman moved into there. And I lived in the same flat till I was 5, and then my mum and dad moved in the same block, but a bigger flat. And when I was there as a child, it had 5 bedrooms, and we now have 3 because we've knocked rooms into one. So my dad, he set up the Gallup poll, and they were very involved as parents. And the London County Council said that they weren't going to rebuild a school by Gospel Oak Station because there wasn't the need. And he got his researchers to knock on the doors of people living locally and prove to the London County Council that the school was needed because it was just full of families, kids of my age. So Gospel Oak School, if you know it, it looks like a prefab, and that's because it was put up really, really quickly. And I went there on my 5th birthday, the first day it opened. So I stayed there for 6 years. It was 6 years because I went into the bottom, but it was 6 years because when I went, I could already read, and they moved me up a class, so I was only there for 6 years. And I had a sister who was older than me. She went to Camden School for Girls. I went to Camden School for Girls. I hated it. And I was voted in by the students as a prefect, but I was told that I was far too naughty by the head teacher. She called me in for a meeting. Alison, you've been voted in as a prefect, but you're far too naughty. And I think that summed up my life in the school, really. So I met a man when I was at school, and he was a medical student at Cambridge. His sister lived with my sister at university, and that was 1966, and I can remember it because we won the World Cup. And we're now in 2024, and we're still together. But I was a typical Camden person. What did you do in the 1960s when in Camden? Sex, drugs and rock and roll. That's what it was. Before I met my husband, I was very friendly with lots of guys at William Ellis School, and sadly they were all into heroin. I was very fortunate that my body reacted to drugs very, very badly. And if I took anything, I felt ill for a week. So that's what saved me. I had a friend of my parents who saw a job advertised, which was an apprentice at the City Lit, which is an adult education college in Camden. I got the job, went to the interview, got the job, and became an apprentice, became a librarian. The London County Council, it may have been the ILEA by then, in the London Education Authority, advertised for people to be apprentices. And my librarian said, do it. So I did. They paid me all the way through my college, paid my fees, and I did the exams sort of, and I remember one day saying to myself, Alison, just do it, stop fiddling around. And then I passed my exams. And I was, before that, at the end of college, I had been sent to Holborn College of Law, Language and Commerce, which was in Red Lion Square, Camden, I think. And I was working there. I got so fed up with it, I went to the chief librarian of the Polytechnic of Central London, so it was part of that, and said, I'm going to pay you all my fees back, I can't bear it any longer. Because my boss was, she was very lazy and it was just awful. And he said, oh, well, come over here and run the library here. And it was an international media studies library, and that's what I did. So I was very lucky. We bought a house. It had taken 3 years to do it up. We moved in 1973, and our son was born 9 months later. And it was his 50th birthday this weekend. Isn't that nice? So he was born in 74, so 50 years, 2024, and we all went out, the whole family, to a really nice place. It was just by William Ellis, Actonburley, La Santa Union and Parliament Hill School. And in those days, when you had a baby, you just stopped. So 74, I stopped. I got very involved in the preschool playgroup movement and became treasurer for London. And then in 1979, I joined the Labour Party. And I went to my first Labour Party meeting in Highgate, which is where I live. And they said, would anybody be a governor at a local nursery school? So I said, well, yeah, I will. And I became a governor there. By that time, it was 1980. And then I had my baby, and I said to the chair, is it all right if I bring my baby with me? And this was a nursery school. She said, yes, as long as you don't feed her in the meeting. So I thought, I don't know how to quite put it politely, but I brought a blanket with me, and I put the blanket over me, and I fed her throughout the meeting, and she had no idea that's what I was doing. And she said, oh, your baby's been so good. And I said, yes, I've been feeding her. Within 6 weeks of that, I was chair of governors and saw some difficult things through. So then that job went. Very, very quickly, I had a job in the Audit Commission where I became auditor, reviewer of education. And I absolutely loved it because it was always about helping people to do better. I should have said I did a postgraduate certificate in teaching adults, which was paid for by the Inner London Education Authority because I was doing all this work training school governors. So when I worked for the Audit Commission, it was always about helping people to do better. So I go in with a framework and say, this is a framework that we're thinking of using. What do you think about it? What outcomes do you want? And then we'd work together on that. I'll never forget, well, the first time I did it, the person I was working with, who was the head of law, said, can you give us 6 months? And we gave her 6 months to get it all right, because what I was doing was bringing in expertise about what things should look like. And she did brilliantly. And so I always worked like that. I became involved in the voluntary sector, first of all, because I went to work for Elfrida Rathbone as an advocate for parents of children with special needs. And that was a 2.5-year contract. And so I felt very comfortable in it. And then, as I said, I started to do my MBA. And then I was seen as a different sort of person. Rather than as a volunteer working, I was a professional. And, then my husband left work and he became very involved in the voluntary sector, and he's chaired things like the NSPCC. And I thought, okay, Alison, get involved, it's really, really interesting. So I saw a role advertised for what became known as Freedom from Torture and was on their board for 6 years. I also saw a role advertised for Action for Children. And I really enjoyed that. It was going through a lot of change, and from running children's homes to running services for councils. I'd been doing work in the Audit Commission in Health, and I noticed there was a public meeting in Camden and Islington Mental Health Trust, just behind King's Cross. So I went to the meeting, and North Central London were telling us how they were taking things on, and it was all going to be wonderful. So I said, well, how are you going to learn to listen to local people and patients? And they said, we have a charity that does that for us. I said, no, how are you going to help the people that work for you listen and learn from what they need? Oh, well, that's fine, it's all dealt with. So I said, well, you're not answering my question. I'll ask you afterwards, outside. At the end of the meeting, somebody came up to me called Pat Callahan, and she said, have you ever thought about becoming a counsellor? And I said, well, no, nobody's ever asked me. So she said, well, I think you'll be a really good counsellor. Get your application in this weekend, because it's closing date, and we'll see where it goes from there. Well, application in, closing date, got accepted, got a branch, Haverstock, and then got elected. My mum was much, much, much younger than my dad. She became a voluntary social worker for Camden while she was a governor at Carlton School, and she became chair of governors at Carlton School. Unfortunately, she was an alcoholic and got dementia, and she had 12 years of we had 12 years of live-in care, in her home. We were very, very lucky with the carer, and I'm still in touch with her. And my mum died 14 years ago. And she went to day centres and things like that. My mum was difficult because all her cousins were all educated. her mum and dad didn't have the money for her to be educated. So she was not educated. She went to work for Lever Brothers, who said that they would put her through college, but they only put the men through college. And I think her life, she always felt that life for other people was better. And my dad managed by having a very successful work life, but when he retired, he did find it quite difficult. And he died in 1982, and my mum died in 2010, so 28 years later. Very sad, really. How did I get on the board of Age UK Camden? My husband saw it advertised in the Hammond High. No, CNJ. He said, apply for this. And I wanted to come because, having been older people's champion, I knew what a brilliant job Age UK Camden did. And during COVID, how they were the saviours. And how it was spread over Camden. It provided so many different services. And for me, it was an anchor institution. So that's how I got involved. It's about holding the organisation to account. But it's about being absolutely clear about what the priorities are, and what the risks are, including particularly strategic risks, and ensuring the organisation is doing the right things in the right way, for the right people, for the right reasons. And my experience of life is being held to account as a manager is hugely helpful, provided you're held to account for the right things. And also to say thank you to people. Yeah, that's really, really important. What I enjoy is being part of a really, really good organisation that makes a huge difference to a large number of people's lives, and don't think that it's just the people who come to use your services or you provide services for. It's all the people. I mean, with my mum, when she had dementia, there were 20 people round her who were watching, supporting, encouraging. So it's helping people. Being a trustee is helping people to reflect and to do even better. Because the world changes. I mean, if you think of what the world was like when I first became a governor in 1979, and what it's like, 45 years later. One of the best things that is different is that there's so much more of a focus on equalities, diversity and inclusion, and about people's rights to be treated properly. Social justice. It's not the norm of how people are treated, but it's the norm to ask the question. And so my dad was very, very poor. He was so poor that they had to forage after the market had left for food. And I was always brought up to really, really hate charities, because he was a charity kid. And that, de haut en bas, we had the money and we're doing that. And I still find food banks really, really difficult because of my father's experience. But I think now there's much more of a focus on people have rights, we have responsibilities, and treating people with respect. think that's the big change.
The story that I then went on to tell was the story of Stone Soup. And Stone Soup is all about everybody putting in a little. And together we have a feast. That's the heart of it all. About living a good life. That if we all share what we have, the outcome is a feast for us all.
I live right on Hampstead Heath. I have a key onto Hampstead Heath. The block of flats where I live, we have a key. We were built in the early 1906, and it used to be all open for the Heath to us, but of course things started to happen, so we had to put a gate. So just walking round a pond, walking up Parliament Hill, going to Kenwood for a coffee, going to Kenwood to look at a painting or two, looking at the dogs playing, watching the kids in the playground. You've got absolutely everything you could possibly want on Hampstead Heath, and I am so lucky. We look south and west over Hampstead Heath. We get the sun. It saves my life.